Rob Salomon,
Yes.
I'm trying to get your title right here. You are the Dean of the Stern School of Business at NYU Abu Dhabi?
Yeah, that's right.
Very good. So it only took me a few turns to try and get it right.
You got it.
You talked about Abu Dhabi and New York City, and you looked at, or you mentioned, if you're young and you're adventurous, Abu Dhabi might be the place to be. Why do you think Abu Dhabi is, from a business person's point of view, why would Abu Dhabi be the place to be?
Because of the transformation that the UAE economy is going through, there are lots of opportunities in different areas. They're experimenting in lots of different industries. They're taking chances in lots of different places. They're making investments in all different areas. So if you're young and you want to explore and you want to try, I think I want to build my career in AI, this is a great place to do that. If you're young and you're thinking to yourself, oh, I want to get into the technology space or the sustainability space, this is the place to be. Even in the investment space, in finance, there's so much going on here. So this is a place that is changing rapidly. And if you just kind of have a vision and you're willing to take a chance, I think that this is a great place to build a career.
So I think one of the advantages that people have when they come out here is that they're able to climb whatever industry you're in. You're able to climb that corporate ladder faster. I look at myself, for instance. I don't know if I would have achieved some of the job titles that I have had if I had stayed back home. Partly because it usually goes a little bit slower. There might be people who, when I started in the industry in my late 20s or early 30s, there might have been people who were 60 and not going anywhere. And then there would have been that natural sort of growth myself, but it would have taken a lot of other people maybe retiring or moving on. And there isn't that same movement. If you're young and you're working on your career here, and say you were to go to the States, do you think that your experience specifically in Abu Dhabi and the UAE would be helpful, or would it be the fact that you are just maybe having certain advantages here that you wouldn't have gotten anywhere else?
I think that there's an element to what you're saying, which is that if you come here, you probably will get involved a lot more in business in a more meaningful way than you might say in New York City.
Right.
Because if you're in New York City, you're one of, and I'm going to get the numbers wrong, but you're one of 12 million people living in New York City and one of 18 million people living in the greater New York metropolitan area. The New York metropolitan area, even New York City, is bigger than all of the UAE. Right, so you are just a small piece of that. And because New York City's been around for a really long time, hundreds of years, there is a process. You go in there and you're a part of a machine. So you enter at an entry level and there's steps you have to follow to climb the ladder. Here you come, and in Abu Dhabi, let's say you're in a city of what, 2 million, if I'm being generous, right? Like approaching 2 million. There are lots of different opportunities to get involved and to get involved meaningfully right at the beginning. It's almost like being at a startup versus being at an established organization. At a startup, you have to be the jack of all trades. You have to be the strategy person, you have to be the finance person, you have to be the marketing person, because everybody's running around trying to make sure that things get done. And it's not one person's responsibility to do X. Everybody has to do a little bit of everything. In New York City, you have 50 people in marketing and 150 people in finance, and all within one organization. So I think you do get a lot more exposure to a broader part of the business here in Abu Dhabi, and you can achieve a lot more here at a younger age than you might if you were in New York. And that exposure helps you when you go to a larger city like a London or a New York or a Paris or a Los Angeles, because you've had more experiences.
So looking at your situation, because please don't take this the wrong way, but you're not a younger person.
Oh, I don't know what to do with that information. I'm not. That'll
Well,
be news to my kids.
Based on your hairline, you're certainly doing better than I am. But you've ended up here. Why is it that, and you had a successful career at the main campus at NYU. What made you decide to make that jump, to take that adventurous leap?
Yeah.
And I think it is adventurous when people decide at any point in their life to live overseas. Certainly when you're a little bit older to do it. What made you decide you wanted to come?
So for me, I think, it's definitely that adventure piece. I might not have the same sense of adventure that I had when I was 20, but this to me is like the coolest thing I've ever done in my career. The why is about how exciting it was, the potential. And I'm at a little bit of a different place in my career. So as an academic, I've kind of achieved most of what I could sort of on the academic side. I've done the research. I started my career as assistant professor. I rose to full professor. I hold a fellow position at NYU as a faculty member at the Stern School of Business. And 4 years ago, when they approached me with this opportunity, I looked around, I said, well, first, my kids were about to leave the house. I mean, my daughter was going to college. My son was about to go to college. So we were going to be empty nesters, my wife and I. And I thought, what's that next adventure? And I've reached that point in my career where it's not about my own career anymore. I've started to think a little bit about what good can I do while I'm here, and what do I want my kids to be able to say to their kids and their grandkids about what their dad did. And I looked at the opportunity to try and help build a business school here. And I thought to myself, when else am I ever going to get the opportunity in my career to make an impact like this at a national level? And so all those things spoke to me. And then the last piece of it was that I've studied globalization my entire career. That's been my area of expertise, my area of focus. And, I've studied it for so long. Why not try it?
So a couple of things I want to unpack there. First of all, I'll start with the most recent thing that you said. How does a young man get into the idea of wanting to study globalization? It's not the sexiest of topics, but maybe it is to you.
I mean, I find it sexy, but yes, it's not.
So what is it?
The sexy topics right now are, entrepreneurship and ventures and AI and fintech. And those are the areas that are sort of the sexiest ones right now. Globalization is one of those topics that always remains important, but it doesn't hit the top 5 list of sexiest topics alive.
But I would say, sorry to interrupt you there, I would say that with the first 100 days of Trump's second term in office, he's turned globalization into certainly an incredibly newsy topic.
Yes. And the Trump 1, his first administration, also made my field more relevant. I got busier.
What was it you were attracted to in the field of globalization?
Oh, okay, so in order to understand why I'm attracted to that field, I think you need to understand a little bit about me. So my dad is from Spain and actually spent some time living in Cuba, and then from Cuba came to the United States. My mom's family is from Italy. So I grew up in a household where we often spoke Spanish, and where I grew up in a neighborhood where almost nobody spoke Spanish. So growing up, I was aware that we were somehow different from everyone else in the neighborhood that I grew up in. And so that sort of got me to thinking about why are we different? What do those differences mean? What does it mean to have all my family in Spain and none of my family in the United States? So those were part of the things that got me interested. And then globalization and business, I want to say I must have been about 8 or 9 years old. And I was in Spain at the time because my parents would send me to Spain for the summers to spend the summers with my family. And my aunt and uncle were super sweet. They bought me a pair of sneakers, a new pair of sneakers, a pair of Nike sneakers. And when I looked in the tag, I was like, oh, these are American sneakers. Of course, they're Nikes. And on the tag, it said, made in China. And I thought that was really interesting because as a kid, I processed this as, this is an American brand. Why aren't these sneakers made in America? So things like that. And growing up, spending a portion of my time in Spain, I would see products that existed in Spain that didn't exist in the United States, and ways that I would behave because I considered myself American that were considered inappropriate in Spain. And I was learning what those boundaries were, making mistakes, and trying to understand why people behave in certain ways in certain places. So those are the kinds of things that first got me interested in globalization. And then I just followed the educational path in that direction.
So we talked about NYU Abu Dhabi and the Stern Business School. This is the 15th year since the school opened in Abu Dhabi, since the campus, not the Stern School,
right,
but since the main campus opened. And we'll get to the Stern Business School opening later. But you were in the States at NYU, the main campus. What were some of the reactions when it came down that the university was going to open up a campus in Abu Dhabi?
I think it was mixed. I think there was some part of the campus, some folks at the campus who were super excited about opening up in Abu Dhabi and saw the potential. And at that time, when they were thinking about, now I'm going back to 2008, because even though the campus opened in 2010, or the program opened in 2010.
The announcement.
Right. I don't think, it wasn't until 2007, 2008 that they started socializing it with the folks in New York. And like I said, it was mixed. There were some folks who were super excited about it because they saw the potential. But in 2007, 2008, the UAE wasn't what it is today. I mean, you look at the UAE today and everybody says, oh, it's arrived. It's there. And NYU had that vision 16, 17, 18 years ago to make a bet on a place that hadn't quite arrived yet, but they saw it was coming. So some faculty were excited because they saw that. Other faculty were a little bit more hesitant about it for a variety of reasons, right? Partly because when you think about the United States and relationships in the Middle East, they're complicated. And so there were a lot of folks who were, adamant that NYU shouldn't be doing it. Our president at the time, John Sexton, who I actually admire, I think he's an amazing, amazing man. I remember sitting down with him at one point. This was in 2008, and I was a junior faculty at the time. And he was sharing the idea. And his argument was, look, NYU is an outstanding institution. But we have to think about the next 100, 200, 500 years of this institution. And our ambition is to be like a Harvard, a Princeton, a Yale. And if we want to get there, it's not going to be by competing with the Harvard, the Yales, and the Princetons in the traditional space of arts and sciences. And we need to take a chance. And our chance, our turn at bat to try and knock it out of the park is global. And if this works, this has the potential to set NYU up into that class of schools that is in the same breath with the Harvard, the Yales, and the Princetons. And if I'm being honest, I think he accomplished that. If you look at NYU Abu Dhabi right now, the admissions rates at NYU Abu Dhabi are scary low. They are of the order, they're lower than Harvard. They're around where Princeton is. So NYU Abu Dhabi itself as an institution, I think, is on par with any other institution in the world.
And there's so many things that I want to unpack there. I guess the first thing I would look at is we'll pause the NYU Abu Dhabi conversation just for a second, and we'll jump to what you're doing. So the Stern School, Business School, started, I guess, accepting students last year, September, October?
Yeah, the program started in January. That was when our first class arrived. We announced the program, inaugurated it about a year ago now, about June of last year, I want to say. So we haven't been here very long. We're a small part of even NYU Abu Dhabi's history.
And how is it going so far? You've been doing it now, I guess, almost 6 months.
I have to pinch myself because it's been going way, way, way better than I ever could have expected. So I'm not just saying that I'm trying to self-promote or as a sales pitch. It has been so incredibly well received here by the business community, by students who are looking to study and do their business education in the region, by partners outside of the school. I've been blown away. It's been amazing.
So that was what I was going to ask, and I think you answered it, which was, how do you judge the success? Is it, I guess, number of students who are applying for admission, or is it all the other things that you said? And I guess it's a combination.
I look to, we have KPIs. We can say, okay, how many applications do we receive? What's our acceptance rate? If you use acceptance rates loosely as a indicator of selectivity and quality, what are the average scores and experience of the students coming in? Just as important on the back end, people who go to business schools want to know that they will have meaningful job outcomes when the program is finished. So what do our recruiting outcomes look like? Are students getting jobs with the top companies in the region? So all those things, those to me are important. And those are short-term indicators of progress and success. But to me, honestly, I will consider this a success if my kids are able to tell their own grandkids, so my great-grandkids, that their father helped build this program. So if in 75 years from now, the Stern School of Business at NYU Abu Dhabi is still here, it's still thriving, it has multiple programs, and is a vibrant part of the community, producing talent and a talent pipeline for Abu Dhabi, for the UAE, and for the broader MENA region. That, to me, is success.
And that sounds like it would be a good way to judge success. But I'm curious about the students that you have applying for admission. Is it from the global south? Is it from the region? Do you get people from the States who are wanting to come over as well?
We do.
And so who is there probably isn't a typical, but give me an idea about the sorts of students that are applying to come to study in Abu Dhabi.
So we had our first inaugural class start in January. And that class consisted of 54 students, or consists of 54 students. They're still in the program. Of those 54 students, 11 are American, more or less, I believe. I want to say 8 are from India. 7 are Emirati. Trying to remember, 4 Chinese, 3 Pakistani, and the remainder are 1. We have 25 countries represented out of the 54 students in the class. So it's incredibly global. We are open to students from anywhere in the world, but there is one thing that's important to us. And again, in the spirit of trying to build a talent pipeline to help contribute to the economy, not just of Abu Dhabi, the UAE, the MENA region, we're looking for people who want to build their careers here. Those young people we were talking about before who are looking for adventure and want to do something really cool and interesting, and who want to be part of ventures, building new businesses in new industries, in new areas, but to do it here in this region. That's what we're looking for.
And I think that's one of the, I was working at the national newspaper many years ago when Mohammed bin Zayed, who was the crown prince at the time, started talking about, this knowledge-based economy, right? And there's a very famous speech of his at the World Government Summit in Dubai, and I think it was maybe 2008. Maybe it was 10. I might be getting the year wrong, where he talked about how, as Emiratis, we will cheer when that last barrel of oil leaves the country, because we will know that we have done everything that we can do to compete on the global stage. So knowledge-based economy being sort of the foundation, and then valuing education and building up all of the educational institutions that, a country that's growing needs. Yeah. And it's interesting that you're getting so many people from so many different parts of the world. I'm not surprised, of course, that you're getting them from people, who are maybe a 6-hour flight from here. I'm surprised that you're getting as many Americans as you are. Does that surprise you?
I don't know if I would use the word surprised. If you look at our class of the 54 students, 40% of them were resident here before they joined the program. So although they might hold an American passport, a U.S. passport, they were living here. Yeah. So home was here, right, for many of them. So I'm not really surprised. It's an American institution. But the one thing I'm pleased with is that there are so many Americans who are saying, hey, I would want to build my career. That's the surprising part. And I guess, if you put it that way, I guess I'm back to, maybe I'm a little surprised. I guess that's right.
Does it, even though you grew up in the household that you described, does it surprise you, like there's such a large percentage of Americans that don't even have a passport? And back when I was growing up, of course, as a Canadian, you only needed a driver's license to go to the States. Yeah. Now, of course, Americans need a passport to go anywhere.
Yeah, to Canada or Mexico, when that didn't used to be the case.
Absolutely. Yeah. So there's still such a low percentage of Americans that don't have passports, which means they're going nowhere. Does that surprise you that? I guess it does, because you're saying that it surprises you that there are Americans who are wanting to build at least a career here.
Yeah.
But does it surprise you that more Americans aren't wanting to sort of do what you did when you were growing up, sort of traveling back to, your ancestral home in Spain?
So I'm going to get some of these statistics wrong, but I'll just share some of them with you. I believe before the law changed so that now you need a passport to go to Mexico and Canada in the United States, I think something like 14% of Americans held a passport, a very low number. And now I think that number's up to almost 40%. Right? But that still says that 50-something, 60% of Americans don't hold a passport. But that's not actually, I think historically that's kind of a high number. Sociologically speaking, most people don't leave their home countries, like ever in their lifetimes. I think there's some statistic like more than 85% of people never, ever, ever leave their home countries. When you look at a country like the United States, there are a lot of Americans. There's 330 million. So it's not super surprising. And America is a diverse place. There are people from all over the world who've made their lives in the United States. Like my parents, one from family from Italy, the other from Spain / via Cuba. So, I'm not an atypical American story. So Americans tend to be, on average, a little bit more travel focused, a little bit more diverse, a little bit more open to going to new and different places. So it's not entirely surprising in that way. And again, because there's a lot of Americans, it doesn't take a lot to leave for it to seem like there's a lot that are doing, that are entering programs like ours.
Right. So 54 students, we talked about KPIs earlier, is there a KPI or a goal for the second class is there a number that you would want to hit? 54 up to?
So 40 to 50 is our number. That's what we started with last year, 40 to 50 students. We were lucky we surpassed 54. We're entering the second class the same way we entered the first, which was 40 to 50 students. We'd be very pleased if we had enough high-quality applicants that we could achieve more than 50.
And part of the program is they do get to spend time studying at the main campus, correct?
Yeah, that's right. Actually, they're there right now. So those 54 students, or a subset of them, 46 of them are currently in the United States, in New York City, studying on our campus in New York with our faculty in New York. Several students stayed back for a variety of reasons, and we are providing programming for them here in Abu Dhabi.
Can I ask for the variety of reasons question, which is, of course, considering what's happening there, is there an added challenge because of the current administration's approach to immigration?
Yes.
And the students are accepting that this is just the world in which we live and we have to get on with it the best we can?
I think that's right. I think it falls into two camps. One is the camp that has difficulty getting visas, and there's nothing that they can do about that. And it's not even clear that those visa issues would be much easier under a different administration, right? Visas are complicated to get for anybody, anywhere. The second part I did not anticipate, which is that we have some folks now expressing a little bit of reticence to go to the United States. Like, I don't feel welcomed in a way I did before, and maybe I don't feel as safe as I might have 5-10 years ago.
Yeah, I had when I was in Doha, I had a Qatari colleague, a young woman, a mother of a couple of young boys, who was getting a graduate degree, and part of that she was spending in Boston. Now, she wears a hijab, and she talked about her time. She didn't face anything directly, but there was certainly an apprehension on her part before going. And then I'm going to put words in her mouth, but if there is a chance in the future to go back to the States, I'm not sure she's going to feel comfortable enough to take it. And that was, of course, before the current administration was in office. So I think it's just, in some cities, people who are obviously of a different, or who are obviously of a certain religion, sometimes they just face issues, because people are ignorant.
I get it.
Yeah.
And I feel for my, I feel for my colleagues who, and our students who express that. I feel bad that they feel that way. They shouldn't have to feel unwelcome or unsafe in the United States, and that makes me sad. It's in some ways been to our benefit, Stern, meaning the Stern School of Business here in Abu Dhabi, because we're seeing increased interest when we go around and we speak with potential applicants or people who are interested in pursuing their MBA and business school studies. We hear, I would have applied to an MBA program in the United States, but because I don't feel welcomed or safe, I am considering other programs and other options in other areas. So that seems to be an increasing trend that we've noticed.
And this is, I think, one of the great dilemmas that America faces. They are seen. Again, I was in Doha. I worked at the Qatar Foundation, and there were 6 main university campuses, not main, but there were 6 university campuses there. There was Georgetown and Virginia Arts Commonwealth, or Virginia Commonwealth Arts.
Are we allowed to talk about competitors on this podcast?
Sure, of course. There were also, there's Texas A&M and Northwestern. And what they noticed is that they would get a lot of people from this part of the world who would be interested in studying at a reputable American university, because they knew that they would be getting a fantastic education. But they didn't necessarily ever want to travel to the States. And that, I think, is one of the great dilemmas, is that and it's one of the dichotomies that exists in America, is that you have such amazing opportunities, but sometimes you have to put up, and I guess this is true in many parts of the world, so maybe it's not just America, but that you also have to put up with an awful lot of crap sometimes. Yeah. And for so many of those students, the universities, the American universities in particular, NYU being one here, but some others in other parts of the world, it's been, I think, a great financial success for the universities. And I think it's also helped spread the brand that, American education are all good, but then it creates a little bit of an awkwardness when, oh, you've now graduated from XYZ American University. Do you want to now go to the States? And the answer might be no. And that's obviously unfortunate.
From my vantage point, that's okay, because we're trying to encourage people to build their careers here. And we believe that there are opportunities here, not just now, but also that there are growing opportunities here. But I would also say that it's not just about students. This is also something we're noticing on the faculty side too. So I'm getting emails now, maybe not once a week, but once every couple of weeks or so, from colleagues back who have been working in the States for a while, who have been writing and said, well, it might be time for me to look for opportunities outside the United States. And so we've been fortunate here in Abu Dhabi that students increasingly want to come here because they see career value and career opportunity more here than some other Western markets might have been in the past. And faculty now, we've been able to hire some tremendous faculty. 20, 30 years ago, this used to be for multinationals what they considered a hardship post. We are sending you somewhere where, it's not maybe where ideally you might have wanted to be. Maybe you wanted to be at the headquarters and work here and build your career in your home country or your adopted home country. So we're going to provide you incentives to go to Dubai, Abu Dhabi, anywhere in the MENA region. Now, this is not a hardship post anymore. This is a plum assignment, 20 to 30 years on. And not only is there talent here, but it's attracting more and more and more and more talent, and of the top talent.
Yeah, I think some of the challenges that the U.S. government faces right now when you talk about a faculty wanting to come out here is because of some of the demands that the administration in the States has put on. Columbia is the most famous one that sort of, agreed. Harvard at the other end said no. A lot of European and I know Canadian universities saw it as an opportunity to poach American talent because, now might be the time when people are feeling a little bit uncomfortable and wanting to leave. I want to talk about that particular issue. And there, depending on, I guess, on where you stand on the political spectrum, you would think that there is a right or a wrong answer. But the challenges that Harvard, I think, faces, as well as so many other law firms, where I don't want to make it them against Donald Trump, but they're deciding that they are standing up for these principles that are at the core value of higher education. Right. How do you
And that are legally protected, right?
Yes.
In some cases under the U.S. Constitution.
But I don't know that that matters to this administration, because they will challenge all those things. And because, of the way that the Supreme Court leans currently, there are no guarantees that some of those constitutional amendments would not sort of be, not overturned, but, a court might rule in a surprising manner. And from speaking to your colleagues who are back at the main campus, what are their thoughts when it comes to some of the challenges that Columbia, which is probably not that far from where the NYU campus is based, and then of course Harvard is, being in Boston? What are their thoughts about what the future holds for academic freedoms in the States?
I'm not a lawyer, and I'm not an expert in the law. Like so I can't really say, because I have my own personal thoughts, but those are just one layperson's opinion. The one thing I would say, though, and one of the things that I think is critical is this notion of immigration, right? And one of the beauties to me of the United States was that the United States traditionally had been a place that attracted talent. And the kicker to it all was that the United States would attract the best talent, and then it was really good at keeping that talent in the U.S., right? And that drove, I have a colleague, Petra Moser at NYU Stern, who studies the effects of immigration on innovation. And, if you look around, what you find in the U.S. is that when you find these big innovations, these companies that have been built around technology or these engineering, these real advances, you tend to find immigrants. And that contribution to the U.S. was traditionally, to me, what was a strength of the U.S. I think about my dad's own case. My dad was in the sugar business, and at the time that he came to the United States in 1960, Cuba provided something like 80% of the sugar to the United States, and he had a special skill. And that skill was super valuable in the United States because they were freaked out that they might lose their access to an important raw material in the food supply chain, which was sugar. That was always sort of, to me, sort of the really fascinating, amazing part of the United States. I look around now and I say that there are opportunities for other countries to be able to take advantage of a system that's in flux and the uncertainty that's going on in the United States right now, to attract some of the talent from the United States to their countries. And I know, for example, some Western European markets have already started looking to hire scholars from the United States to do work there. And I think the UAE actually is in a really interesting position to be able to attract really top-notch talent. Because the market is so stable here. And it's not just so stable, but there's really a commitment to grow in so many different areas that I think that there are opportunities for countries like the UAE to benefit at a time when the U.S. is in a little bit of flux.
So you study globalization.
Yeah.
And of course, I know, you probably know as well, that since the 80s, Donald Trump has talked about how much he loves tariffs. I've seen him speak and talk about how it's his fourth favorite word. And I think the three words that he loves more than tariffs, I think, are performative on his part. I think he says them to appease his Republican base, right? So he says, I think it's God, love, religion, and then tariffs. And I understand, as a real estate broker, a real estate man in New York in the 80s, from an emotional point of view, why he would feel this way about tariffs, because of some of the struggles he would have gone through. But from a academic point of view, from a person who studies globalization, is there tell me what the pros and the cons are to tariffs.
So tariffs are a tax. That's sort of the simplest way to explain it. And in the world of globalization, we view those kinds of taxes, tariffs in particular, as a friction. So if you put a tax on a good coming into your country, what you do is you make it harder for those goods to come into your country because you make it more expensive for consumers to buy those goods. It's the simplest way to think about a tariff. I mean, the cons are they make goods that you might otherwise want to buy a lot more expensive. The cons are you would have had deals at a certain price that then won't get made, and in a deal, there has to be a buyer and a seller. The buyer thinks they're getting something of value from engaging in a particular trade, and they're willing to do it at price X. But now if you put a 30% tariff on top of that at X plus 30%, now I'm not so sure if that product, that good, or that service that I was going to buy adds value, so I won't purchase it. So you're creating all these artificial frictions to the free movement of goods, services, ideas, capital, et cetera. What's the pro of tariffs? Well, I wouldn't say that there are pros of blanket tariffs per se, but there are instances in which you might want to use tariffs to protect certain nascent industries or national interests. Right? So if there are some industries that for strategic reasons in the United States that you want to protect, well, then you might institute or implement tariffs on goods that are targeted in that specific industry or area to make it more expensive for domestic consumers to buy foreign goods or services, and instead to favor domestic goods and services. So in some instances, there might be, let's say semiconductors that are very strategic. You might put a tariff on foreign semiconductors or foreign steel, like the tariffs on foreign steel right now, because you're trying to help out the domestic steel industry. But that creates distortions. Making steel more expensive makes it more expensive because that artificially makes domestic steel more expensive as well when I could have bought cheaper foreign steel, for example. And that has feed-through effects to the real estate people and the people who buy homes. And eventually, if I have to pay more for a home, that means I have less for groceries, et cetera. So, there are some certain specific instances in which tariffs work. But in general, I'm not a fan of tariffs. I think there are better ways to attack a problem than through tariffs. And if we think, it depends on what we think the problem is.
Yeah, of course. I also think that, I believe he has more of an emotional attachment to tariffs than a logical academic approach. But when we do talk about the industries that you could protect, I don't understand why, and maybe it's a generational approach because he is an older guy. I don't understand why he doesn't appreciate that the world, especially I'm Canadian, you're American, we both know how interconnected the auto industry is, for instance, right, for both of our countries. I don't know why there isn't that understanding that we are so intertwined that, so with the auto industry, for instance, because of the free trade agreement signed between Mexico, Canada, and the U.S., you can't tell which car is, a car is maybe 30% Mexican and maybe 40% Canadian and the rest is American. Yeah. And we're so interconnected that and I've been on TV and I've talked about this, it's a self-inflicted situation that they've put them, or that he's put America in. Is there any, I'm trying to say this one question, which is why can't, and I know you don't have the answer, but why do you think that there isn't an ability to appreciate that the globalization, we are also interconnected nowadays?
Yeah. I'm not a psychologist, so I can't speak to Donald Trump's emotional attachment to tariffs. But, to your point, goods go back and forth sometimes between Canada and the United States several times before they're finished, which means you have one good that sort of part of the primary processing is done in the United States. Then it goes to Canada for intermediate assembly. Then it comes back to the United States to add more parts to it. Then it goes back to Canada for them to finish up the parts. Then it goes back to the United States for final assembly. It crosses the border 2 or 3 or 4 different times, and it could be tariffed every single time it crosses the border. So now you're not just talking about layering whatever the new tariff is, 10% on Canada? 10 plus 10, so 20% tariffs. you're talking about 20% the first time it crosses, 20% the second time it crosses, 20% the third time it crosses. And now you're talking about goods where they're becoming that much more expensive to the final end consumer because it has crossed the border several times. That makes it really challenging. And I think of this, I teach business, so I teach the impacts of globalization on businesses. That's my main area. Part of the motivation for doing this is trying to encourage businesses, multinational businesses, to build their products or to make their products in the United States. It's really, really challenging for, if I'm the CEO of a company, to be able to make my future capital expenditure decisions and plans about where to locate my plants. If, sure, today there's a 30 or 40% tariff on goods coming out of China, which if that remains, great. And I know that's going to remain for 5, 10 years. I'll build my plant here today because it's going to take me 2 to 3 to 4 years to get my plant off the ground. But if tomorrow that tariff will change, I can't make my plans on where to build my plant. So this uncertainty in the directionality of the tariffs, the size of the tariffs, the targets of the tariffs, makes it so that there's paralysis. CEOs can deal with certainty. Businesses can deal with certainty. If they know what the certainty is, they can work around it. But when policies change on the fly, and we went, from 100 and something percent tariffs on China?
145.
145% tariffs on China to then a tweet or something that the president put out and said, oh, okay, let's do 80. And then several days later, it became 30. It's really, really hard for businesses to plan where they should put their plants, where they should manufacture, where they should make things, where they should provide their services when the environment around them is constantly changing.
I was listening to, I think it was a Reuters or an FT podcast, and they were speaking to a small business owner. And he said, we now have ships at sea coming from China, but we don't know if they're going to get here in time. So we don't know how much tariff we'll have to be paying once they dock. We know what the tariff was when they left, but now we have no idea. And that, as you said, that uncertainty is what, if I'm a business owner, I can decide, okay, I'm going to freeze hiring, or I'm going to have to lay off some people, or I'm going to have to reduce bonuses, or I'm not going to expand. You can, as you said, you can plan accordingly. But when there is that uncertainty, and that's where I think it must be incredibly fascinating right now for students in the program, because they don't have to go through history books necessarily to learn about so much about when it comes to globalization and global traffic, right? Because it's happening right now.
Yeah.
And so,
and you would think the lessons that we learned of the past. I mean, I'm thinking back to Smoot-Hawley in the early 1930s.
Well, this is somebody who I had to look up because this all of a sudden was being quoted all the time, this Smoot-Hawley.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, who is this? And I don't think his name has been bandied about more than it has been in the last 5 months.
Yeah, there was the Smoot-Hawley Act of 1930. Again, I tend to sort of get the dates a little bit wrong here. Maybe it was 1931. But yeah, that was the tariff act that helped. I use the word help. That created a deeper recession that ultimately facilitated the Depression.
Okay, so you said the R word. I ask you to put your psychic hat on. Do you think there's a recession in the next 12 months in the States?
Well, so Q1 came in at what, minus 0.3%? By the technical definition of a recession, we have one more negative quarter and we're technically in a recession, right? So I put the odds at over 50%. Is it 51%? Is it 65%? Ask again tomorrow. If you would have asked me this 2 weeks ago when the tariffs on China were still 145%, I would have said, the likelihood of recession was much, much higher. Dialing the rhetoric and bringing down some of the tariffs could ameliorate that a little bit, but I still think that we're more likely than not, greater than 50% chance that either we will be in a recession or we might even currently be in one right now in the United States. And I feel like going back to what you were saying before about SMEs, small and medium-sized enterprises, I think those will be the ones that are hardest hit. If you're,
Walmart.
Walmart, I think, will be okay,
Yes.
right? Because there are still necessities that people need to buy. But if you are a toy shop and all of a sudden the prices of your goods are going up by 30, 40% and people aren't buying toys or buying many fewer toys, that's existential for you as a toy shop owner. If you're a shoe store and all of a sudden the tariffs raise the cost of your shoes by 30, 40, 50%, more, sometimes 80 to 100%, that is existential for you in a way that, as a monoline business that sells individual products that are subject to these tariffs, those are the folks I feel I'm the most nervous for.
So what about Donald Trump's recent post on, I'm not sure if it was Truth Social or X, where he said, Walmart came out and they talked about it, and he had urged the businesses to eat the tariffs. I think that's not realistic, for heaven's sakes. I mean, America is a capitalist society, and it's a wonderful capitalist society at that. But to start telling businesses that I'm going to introduce tariffs and then you're going to have to eat them and not pass them on to the consumers?
Yeah, that's a little heavy-handed, right? And it's not exactly, I think, how our market system was designed. I think if let's assume that Walmart does eat, let's say they eat 100% of the tariffs. What is the outcome of that? Well, lower profitability, which means less money for shareholders who own the company, which means that the shareholders then have less money to spend. So you have less spending somewhere else. You have lower profitability, means less investment for Walmart in future advances, future innovation, for future technology. So it's not just about Walmart eating the tariffs. It has implications for, maybe shareholders are sort of a small portion of the population, but there are a lot of 401ks, a lot of institutions that own a lot of Walmart shares that have real impact for people who are eventual customers and buy things. So it's not. It's in some ways it's fungible.
So Donald Trump was in the region recently. He was in Saudi, Qatar, and then the UAE, here in Abu Dhabi. Why do you think, without getting into specifics, but why in general do you think that Donald Trump has, because his first trip overseas during his first administration was to Saudi, and although he was in the Vatican for the Pope's funeral, this is his first planned trip back here. Why do you think that Donald Trump has such an affinity with the Gulf leadership?
I don't know the answer to that question. I really don't.
So I'll put my neck out on the line and I'll share my thoughts. There's a couple of things. First of all, he's Republican. And I think Republicans by and far, because they traditionally, correct me if I'm wrong, you're the American, I'm Canadian, I'm just sort of an observer. But traditionally, Americans value, traditions. They're a little bit more conservative. They're not as woke, perhaps, as Democrats. And that's very much in keeping with some of the same principles that, Gulf leaders value. I'll go one step further and I'll say that Gulf leadership is very high on creating businesses. They're about not just a knowledge-based economy, but they're also wanting to constantly be in a business mode. And say what you want about Donald Trump's trip, there were maybe some high points and some low points, but he came here to cut business deals. And I think that Gulf leadership felt very comfortable engaging with him on those business deals.
Yeah.
Much like,
and I think there's some experience there, right?
Absolutely.
They have done some deals with the Trump
Yes.
family in the past, and
Yes.
right. So they're
and you could say those are above board or not, but he certainly has engaged with so many the leaders during his first term in office, and then the family members have continued to engage with others in this part of the world. And I think if you look at China, what China does so well in Africa from a business point of view is they don't talk about issues that affect local governments. They come in and they do business.
right.
And I think that leadership in this part of the world appreciates someone who only wants to talk about the business. And that, and of course, lifting the sanctions on or vowing to lift the sanctions on Syria, I think is also, something that helped Donald Trump in the eyes of, Gulf leaders as well. I wanted to get back to Stern and your time there. What is it that you think, if we're looking to the future, say we're 2025, so let's use a nice round number, 2030.
Okay.
Where do you think the school is at? How would it have grown, evolved, changed from where it is today?
So I would like to think that come 2030, we here in Abu Dhabi, the Stern School of Business in Abu Dhabi, will look in many ways like the Stern School of Business in New York in a portfolio standpoint, or from a portfolio standpoint, having undergraduate programming, executive MBA program, executive education programming, and then maybe some specialized master's programs like the ones in the US. I would love to be able to have more exchange with both New York and Shanghai, to have our students sort of go throughout the network, business students. So we already do that for our undergrads who do semester abroad or study abroad. I would love to create something like that here in Abu Dhabi, to have our New York students come here, to have our Shanghai students come here, to have our students from here go to Shanghai and New York and spend time there. So I think, when I think about the ambitions of the Stern School here in Abu Dhabi, the goal certainly is to be the best business school anywhere in the region. Hands down, that's our number one goal. And then growth over time by adding programs, whether those are executive MBA programs, undergraduate programs, exec ed programs, to be able to better serve the needs of this community and to grow with this community to create more and more of a talent pipeline for this community, for the business community and the economy over time.
And my last question, you've now been in Abu Dhabi for a year yourself?
Yes, a little bit over a year, full time.
Your biggest surprise?
Good question. I think, so I've been coming back and forth now for 4 years, but I've been living here for about a little bit less than 18 months. The biggest surprise is that there's a lot more openness here than I anticipated. And I'm going to be, I make a lot of mistakes. I'm not a perfect human, just like any other human. I don't know everything and I mess up a lot. And stick around me for a while, spend some time with me and you'll see all the ways in which I mess up. But one of the cool things for me, or one of the most interesting things, is that, as a kid, especially in the United States, there's a certain way of viewing the Middle East. And there are certain things that you're taught about the Middle East. And as I spent more and more time here over the last 4 years or more, I've realized I've had to unlearn a lot of those things because the place is, more open than I was led to believe as a kid growing up. So that, I think, is my biggest surprise.
Okay, I lied. I have one more question.
Yeah.
Something that I like to ask people. I had a post on LinkedIn where I admitted a big mistake that the news organization I was with at that time, how we dropped the ball. And the response was amazing. It was one of the most successful, if you can go by impressions and comments, one of the most successful posts I had made. So I like to ask people this. What is your biggest professional fail?
Ooh, I've made a lot. So I would hope that at some level that I've had more successes than failures, but I've made a lot of failures. A couple come to mind. I mean, do you want my wife's phone number? You can call her. I mean, she probably has a list.
Would she give personal or professional? I want professional.
Yes. So one, for example, was I misread how important or unimportant in-person education was during the pandemic. So students kept telling, at that time I was running the executive programs at Stern in New York, and our executive students were telling us, we want to be in person, we want to be in person, we want to be in person. And so we worked incredibly hard to make sure that we had the infrastructure ready to go, social distancing, masks, part of the class in person, part of the class remote, blended classroom. We wanted to do everything we could to make sure that students could come in person. And then we opened the doors and said, okay, we're now open for business in person, only to find out that about 10% of the students showed up and it was a complete failure, and the students hated it, and the faculty hated it, and it was too early, and it was the wrong decision. So that's one.
Was that, I'm curious about that, was that because of what was the current environment that we're all in where we were concerned for our lives, or was that just because they said one thing, but really they didn't want to put the effort in to make the trip?
I think it's more akin to the latter, but not about not making the effort. I think that they said one thing, but then when push came to shove, either they didn't want to leave their home, or the blended experience was just not appetizing. You know, being in a classroom where half the class is there in person and the other half of the class is behind a screen, and the faculty member has to try and incorporate the people on Zoom and the people physically in the classroom, made it a really bad experience. So I've found that if you're going to do remote education, do remote education. If you're going to do in-person education, do in-person education. But blending is really, really hard.
Right.
So that's one failure. I'll give you another failure, and I don't want to provide too many of the specifics because we're still going through this right now. And there was a program that we introduced when I was running the executive programs at Stern and NYU Abu Dhabi, a specialized master's program. It was all the rage at the time. Everybody was interested in this topic area. Everybody wanted to be in this area. And we had a specialization that as you could major in this area. And for 10 years, we had that specialization, and it was growing, and people were really excited about it. And we said, all right, let's offer a degree in this area. And so we offered a degree in that area. And then COVID happened. So right before we were going to launch it, COVID happened. And then a couple years later, we revisited it and we said, okay, 2022 or so, all right, now's the time to launch this new program. So we launched the program, and then AI took off. And what it turned out was it was the wrong program at the wrong time, and the world had moved on. So that was it was a programmatic failure. It happened under my watch. It was on me. I accept responsibility for it. Look, I'm going to make mistakes. I did make a mistake. I probably cost the school some money. Hopefully they're not going to fire me after they hear this, but I think they already know. But and I always tell people I work with, maybe this is a lesson too for folks out there who are starting their careers, or junior folks in their careers, is that I always tell people, I'm okay with mistakes. You're going to make mistakes. I wouldn't expect anything less. But if you make a mistake, just own up to it. Let me know. Like, I don't want surprises. I can deal with mistakes. Mistakes we happen all the time. We can deal with them. We can work around them. But covering them up or trying to hide them because you feel shame or embarrassment, or those are natural feelings when you make mistakes. Shame and embarrassment. And I think the older I get, the more comfortable I've felt admitting when I'm embarrassed or when I've made a mistake. Or I would say that would be one thing. And that's why when you asked before, what's a really important skill for business leaders? Empathy. Really being empathetic and understanding when people make mistakes and understanding what others are going through, to think allocentrically, not just egocentrically, not just about yourself and your own needs and your own desires, but what would help the other person and what is the other person trying to achieve. Letting go of the me, my interests has been a really, and I'm fortunate that I'm in a place in my career where I'm able to do that. I've reached a place in my career where I'm able to do that. But that was one of the most freeing things and freeing experiences I've ever had in my entire career. So being empathetic and owning up to mistakes, because mistakes happen, a natural part of life.
Rob, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you.